You're too practical, Maria. My friends think I need a muse, someone with an artistic soul. It was 5 in the morning. The Chicago skyline was just a gray, freezing smudge through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our penthouse. Walker was packing his vintage leather weekender bag. He wouldn't look at me. He was too busy folding the Italian silk shirts I'd bought him for his birthday last month. A muse, I repeated, my voice flat. Yes, someone who understands the struggle of creation. You manage contracts, Maria. It's stifling. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just watched him zip the bag. The zipper sounded like a final judgment. Okay, I said. Go find your muse. Asterisk before we dive deeper, drop a comment. Have you ever supported someone who made you feel small just to make themselves feel big? I want to hear your story. Asterisk. He stopped at the door, hand on the brass handle. He looked back, expecting a scene. He wanted tears. He wanted me to throw myself at his feet so he could feel like the tragic hero in his own movie. Walker, I said. Before you go, there's something I need to tell you. About yesterday. He sighed, a heavy theatrical sound that echoed in the large, empty room. Maria, please. I can't talk about your contract administration right now. My gallery's in a delicate place. I need headspace for art, not spreadsheets. Froze. My hand was resting on my phone, the screen still glowing with the notification from the bank. Contract administration, I echoed. Yes. Paperwork. The filing. Keep it. I need to go where I'm appreciated. He walked out. The latch clicked. And just like that, the silence rushed back into the apartment. I looked down at my phone. I unlocked it. I opened the email from the acquisition firm. The subject line read, Transfer complete. The body confirmed the sale of the legacy intellectual property catalog I'd been brokering for 8 months. A deal involving the back catalog of a deceased songwriter, a deal 3 other brokers had failed to close. The sale price was $48 million. My commission, after legal fees and taxes, was $26.5 million. I tried to tell him. I tried to share the biggest win of my career. And he'd called it paperwork. I walked to the window and looked down at the street, watching his figure hail a cab. I wondered for a second how he could be so blind. How could he look at the woman who paid the rent, bought his suits and funded his gallery, and see nothing but a clerk? Then I understood. It hit me with the cold clarity of a balance sheet. It wasn't that he couldn't see me. It was that he literally couldn't afford to see me. It was the narcissist's blind spot. When you stand on a pedestal, you can't see the foundation holding you up. If he looked down, if he really looked at me, he'd have to acknowledge that he wasn't flying. He was being held. He stood on a mountain I'd built, breathing air I'd paid for, wearing clothes I'd selected, and he mistook his altitude for his own ability. He didn't hate me because I was boring. He resented me because deep down, in the parts of his ego he refused to visit, he knew he needed me. And the only way for a weak man to feel strong is to destroy the thing that supports him. I took a sip of cold coffee. He wanted a muse. Fame. He wanted to live in a world of artistic suffering. I could arrange that. I sat down at the dining table, a table made of reclaimed white oak that cost $12,000, which he'd told his friends he'd found at an estate sale. I opened my laptop. I didn't cry. I didn't call my mother. I didn't text my best friend. I opened a new spreadsheet. I titled it, The Audit. If Walker wanted to leave the boring administrator behind, he was going to have to leave the administrator's money behind too. He thought his life was a masterpiece of his own creation. He was about to find out it was a commissioned work, and the patron had just stopped the funding. I stared at the cursor blinking on the screen. This wasn't a heartbreak. This was a liquidation. And I was going to make sure he knew exactly, to the penny, how much his artistic soul actually cost. I pulled up the bank records from 4 years ago. The screen hummed with the cold, blue light of digital evidence. Walker liked to tell people he'd built his gallery, The Void, from the ground up. He liked to talk about the summer he'd spent eating instant noodles, sacrificing his comfort for the sake of the avant-garde. It was a beautiful story. It was romantic. It was also a lie. I scrolled to November of that first year. I found the transfer. $45,000. I remembered that month. Walker had come home gray-faced, smelling of cheap whiskey and panic. The gallery was underwater. The rent in the arts district had doubled, and he hadn't sold a single piece in 3 months. He was going to close. He was crying on the floor of our old apartment, talking about the death of culture. I hadn't told him I had the money. I knew his ego was fragile. If I wrote him a check, he'd feel kept. So I routed the money through a shell corporation I used for IP acquisitions. I sent it as an anonymous angel grant for promising cultural institutions. When the money hit his account, he didn't thank the universe. He didn't thank luck. He looked at me and said, "See, the universe rewards true vision." Someone saw my genius. I'd smiled and poured him wine. I'd let him believe his own myth. I added the $45,000 to the spreadsheet. Then I moved to the sales records. The first 3 paintings he'd ever sold. Abstract, messy, overpriced pieces by a local artist named Julian. Walker had been desperate for a red dot. A sale to prove the gallery had momentum. I opened my personal storage inventory. There they were. 3 paintings by Julian, purchased by 3 separate LLCs I controlled. I'd bought them to save him from the humiliation of an empty opening night. I'd paid $15,000 total. Walker had framed the first dollar he'd made. He didn't know that dollar came from my wallet. Kept digging. It wasn't just money. It was the intellectual property. The essays. The curator's notes that Artforum had praised as incisive and revolutionary. He'd pace around the living room, ranting about textures and negative space, speaking in fragments. I'd sit at my laptop, translating his chaotic rambling into coherent, elegant prose. I'd ghostwritten every catalog introduction. I'd written the grant applications. I'd written the acceptance speeches. I was the architect of his voice. He was just the speaker. I looked at the total at the bottom of the spreadsheet. It wasn't just a number. It was the price of my own erasure. I'd paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to make myself invisible, just so he could shine. Closed the laptop. The sun was rising now, painting the room in pale gold. I felt a strange sense of lightness. He thought I was boring because I talked about contracts. Fine. He was about to learn that contracts are the only things that actually matter when the emotion runs out. I wasn't just his girlfriend. I was his venture capitalist. And I was about to call in the debt. The day of the party arrived with deceptive calmness. Walker sent me a text at noon. No apology. No mention of the fact that he'd walked out on me 2 days prior. Just a list of demands. Asterisk, make sure the catering is top tier. Sylvie and Lilith are coming. They have very specific tastes. No cheap champagne. Asterisk. I stared at the screen. Sylvie and Lilith. The art critics. The women who wore architectural clothing and looked at me like I was a stain on the carpet. They were the friends who'd told him I lacked a soul. I typed back. Everything's taken care of. It wasn't a lie. It was taken care of. Just not in the way he thought. Then my phone pinged again. A voice note from Walker. It was sent to me by mistake. He must have meant to send it to his group chat with them, but his finger had slipped. Press play. The audio was grainy, recorded over the sound of street traffic. God, I'm dreading tonight, Walker's voice said. She tries so hard, you know. But it's all so pedestrian. I just need to get through this birthday and then I can make the clean break. I feel like I'm suffocating. She's an anchor, not a sail. I need to be free to pursue the alchemist deal without her dragging me down with questions about budget. The message ended. 90 seconds. That was all it took to incinerate the last tiny lingering ember of guilt in my chest. He thought I was an anchor. He thought I was dragging him down. I put my phone down on the marble counter. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the vase of white lilies across the room. I walked into my office. I opened the presentation file I'd been building for the party. I added a new slide. I titled it, The Anchor. I embedded the voice note into the slide. If you wanted to talk about being dragged down, we could talk about it. We could talk about gravity. We could talk about who was actually carrying the weight. He wanted to pursue the alchemist deal. He wanted to sign the most reclusive, lucrative artist of the decade. He thought he could do that without me. I laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound in the empty penthouse. I opened my safe. I pulled out a heavy, cream-colored document with a wax seal. The power of attorney. I was the only person in the world who knew who the alchemist was. I was the only person in the world authorized to sign contracts on his behalf. Walker didn't know. He'd spent 2 years trying to find the artist, sending letters to blind P.O. boxes, not realizing the letters were being delivered to my office, not realizing that I was the one reading them and throwing them in the shredder. I placed the document in my bag. Tonight wasn't just a birthday party. It was an exhibition. And I was finally going to unveil the masterpiece I'd been working on for 7 years. The Gilded Room lived up to its name. It was a cavern of velvet and gold leaf, tucked away behind an unmarked door in the city's most expensive district. It smelled of old money and new desperation. I arrived at 8 o'clock exactly. I was wearing a black dress. Simple. Structural. Walker would call it severe. Called it armor. Walker was already there, holding court at the head of the long mahogany table. He was flanked by Sylvie and Lilith. They were laughing, their heads thrown back, necks exposed like swans. They were wearing avant-garde pieces, deconstructed linen, structural wire, clothing that screamed that they were too important to be comfortable. When I approached the table, the laughter died. It didn't fade. It was severed. "Maria," Walker said. "You made it." He didn't stand up. He didn't pull out my chair. He gestured vaguely to the empty seat at the far end of the table. The exile's seat. Sylvie looked me up and down. Her gaze was physical like a damp hand. "So sensible," she purred. "Always so grounded, Maria. It must be nice to be so tethered to the earth." Smiled. It was the smile of a predator watching prey graze. "It keeps the bills paid," I said. They chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. To them, paying bills was a vulgarity, something the help worried about. The dinner was a performance. Walker held forth on the death of modernism, using big words incorrectly, while his court nodded in adoration. They drank the vintage champagne I'd pre-ordered. They ate the caviar I'd paid for. When the dessert plates were cleared, Walker stood up. He tapped his glass with a silver spoon. "I want to make a toast," he announced. "To new beginnings. To shedding the dead weight of the past and finally finding the inspiration we deserve." He looked directly at me as he said it. It wasn't subtle. It was a public dismissal. His friends raised their glasses. "To inspiration," they chorused. I waited for them to drink. I waited for the crystal to lower. Then I stood up. "I have a toast too," I said. Walker rolled his eyes. "Maria, please. We're having a moment. Don't ruin it with a schedule update." I ignored him. I pulled my phone from my clutch. With a single tap, I cast my screen to the massive 80-inch monitor mounted on the wall behind Walker. It had been displaying a loop of abstract digital art. Now it went black. "Walker's always said I lacked vision," I said, my voice steady, cutting through the room like a scalpel. "He told me I was a contract administrator. Paper pusher. So tonight I want to show you what my vision actually looks like." The screen flashed white. Then the numbers appeared. Net commission, $26,500,000. The room went silent. It was a vacuum. "Yesterday, I closed the sale of the Vanguard IP catalog," I said. "It's the largest intellectual property deal in the state this year. And that's my fee." Sylvie choked on her wine. Walker turned around, staring at the screen. His mouth opened but no sound came out. "But that's not why we're here," I continued. I tapped the phone again. The screen changed. This time it was a spreadsheet, A long, detailed list of transactions. You see, Walker, you were right. I am practical. I keep receipts. The rows scrolled up. Rent for the Void Gallery. The lease for the Mercedes he drove. The retainer for the PR firm that got him into art forum. The invoices for the sold paintings that launched his career. I walked toward him. You told your friends I was boring for worrying about money. You didn't have to worry because I did it for you. I paid your rent, bought your suits, even financed your reputation. I faced his friends. He isn't a curator. He's a project. And I'm the only investor. Walker tried to sneer. I didn't let him. I finally get it, I said. I didn't love you. I loved the person I thought you could become. I used my money to sculpt that fantasy. But I was just gilding a pebble. I didn't lose a partner. I stopped funding a bad investment. Money is vulgar, he snapped, clutching the lapels of the jacket I'd bought. You count beans. Curate culture. And next week I'm signing The Alchemist. The room went still. The Alchemist was a myth, a kingmaker. Walker fed on the silence. His proxy meets me Monday. When I sign him, your millions will look small. I looked at him gently. Walker. Who do you think reads The Alchemist's mail? Your letters. Your begging proposals. Tapped my phone. The spreadsheet vanished. A notarized power of attorney filled the screen. The sole representative for The Alchemist. Maria Vane. Silence hit like a wall. I'm the proxy, I said. I've represented him for 7 years. I read every letter you sent. I rejected you 3 months ago. Insufficient capital, no vision. Mondays cancelled. His face collapsed. Around us, his friends were already reaching for their coats. They could smell the end. Picked up my clutch. Happy birthday, Walker. You just lost your patron, your gallery, and your dream. He grabbed my arm, pleading about us, about deals, about being a team. Even then, he was negotiating. There is no we, I said, pulling free. There's you, and the debt you owe. I walked out into the night and never looked back. 6 months later, I sat in my new office, launching grants for artists with real vision and no funding. Walker's gallery folded without my money. His friends vanished. People called me the villain. But the good woman gets used. The villain gets peace. My phone rang. A new artist needed someone to fight for her work. Smiled. This is Maria Vane. Let's get to work.